2, 1.
As the mainstream media continue to provide cover and propaganda for Palestinian terrorists, another nation, Guatemala, has followed American moral leadership and moved its embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. We will analyze why President Trump's embassy move has so infuriated Democrats and the mainstream media. This is about much, much more than just Israel. Spoiler alert. Then we will speak to an actual Jerusalem resident, Yoram Hazony, Dr. Yoram Hazony, about his forthcoming book, The Virtue of Nationalism, and why conservative and classical liberal don't actually mean the same thing, even though everybody says they do. Finally, on this day in history, amid Little Rocket Man's idle threats, we analyze how past presidents have handled communist dictators and collapsing peace talks. I'm Michael Knowles, and this is The Michael Knowles Show. You can probably hear in my voice, I'm still sick and tired of winning. All of the winning of the past 2 weeks has kept me literally sick and tired and probably given me a sinus infection, but that's okay. Nevertheless, I persisted, so we're going to keep trucking on. This morning, I had the great pleasure, by the way, of attending Mira Costa High School to give a speech about gun rights, why conservatives support the Second Amendment, what the Second Amendment means, and why we need to protect it. I'm going to be streaming this from the Daily Wire. We're not quite sure when it's going to go up, but we're going to try to stream it either later today or tomorrow. Be sure to look out for this. I have got to tell you, these kids were so smart. First of all, it was incredibly courageous of the faculty and the staff and the student groups there and the administration to have a speaker come in and defend gun rights at a high school. This was brought to us by the YAF organization at this high school. All of the students were incredibly smart. Incredibly sophisticated, both the Democrats and the Republicans. There was no crazy protest. There was no shouting, just really thoughtful students on both sides. I go to these schools and they make me worried about the future of America because of all these yelling protester types. Then I go to this high school, Mira Costa, and I think, oh man, the future is bright. This is pretty good. Really, really sophisticated students. So we'll have that out for you. It was a really fun time. Good talk, good questions. So look out for that. Before we get into nationalism, this is going to be a really good topic today because the media, they're screaming, the Democrats, they're all arguing, but they're not getting to the actual problem that they have, which is nationalism. We're going to discuss with an expert. Before we do that, we got to thank Honey. We got to thank Honey, a wonderful sponsor, helps keep the lights on. I just used Honey. I use Honey all the time, but I just used it like 2 days ago when I was making a purchase, and it's the best. It just saves you money. Millions of people are using Honey to save money while shopping online. Why wouldn't they? It's free. It takes just 2 clicks to add to your browser, saves you tons of money. It is this ingenious add-on. One of my absolute favorite things about Honey is how much better it makes shopping on Amazon. So Honey will you just add it to your browser. It's free. It will add all sorts of useful info right onto the Amazon page of whatever you're looking at. So you just shop like you normally do. Honey automatically searches the 2 million sellers on Amazon, finds you the lowest price. It shows you items price changes in case you want to wait and decide to buy. If you decide to wait, a Honey drop list will let you know if the price drops. Honey's got your back. You'll never overpay for anything on Amazon again. Honey has saved me personally so much money. In the last few years, you would be out of your mind not to add it to your browser. There is no reason not to add Honey to your browser today. It's free. It takes just 2 clicks to install. It will make sure that you will always get the lowest price on Amazon and other places as well. Add it free right now at joinhoney.com/covfefe, C-O-V-F-E-F-E. Joinhoney.com/covfefe, C-O-V-F-E-F-E. Very, very covfefe. I've been ODing on covfefe recently. That's why you can hear it in my nose, but it's been too good not to. The mainstream media are absolutely furious about President Trump's relocating the American embassy in Israel to the capital of Israel. Here is just a quick rundown, a quick supercut of all of the reporting on that embassy opening from CNN, Vox, Washington Post, the New York Times. Here it is.
Donald J. Trump is now President of the United States. President Obama is the ex-president. And Mr. Trump, for the moment, steps away for the inaugural address.
What a great honor to be able to introduce for the first time ever anywhere the 45th President of the United States of America, Donald
On the shoulder. You adjust the microphone as you told, man.
There it is. That was Jim Acosta at the end, I think. That was really, basically sums up their response. They're so upset. And it is really bizarre when you think about it. because the mainstream media should not have been caught by surprise by this. Every president of the United States, practically every presidential candidate over the last several decades, and certainly every president, has promised to do exactly this to widespread applause in both parties. In case anybody forgot, here's just a quick montage of every president promising to do this.
Jerusalem is still the capital of Israel and must remain an undivided city accessible to all.
As soon as I take office, I will begin the process of moving the United States ambassador to the city of Israel as chosen as its capital.
I continue to say that Jerusalem will be the capital of Israel, and I have said that before, and I will say it again.
And Jerusalem will remain the capital of Israel, and it must remain undivided.
We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem. Therefore, I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. While previous presidents have made this a major campaign promise, they failed to deliver.
Could you spot the difference between all those guys? Clinton promises it, Bush promises, Obama promises, they all promise. Then Trump promises and actually does it. It's not like the mainstream media haven't heard this before. They just didn't believe it because in the old days, politicians would just say certain things and we knew they didn't really mean it. And they knew that we knew that they didn't really mean it, but it's just kind of political talk. Then Trump says he's going to do something and he does it and everybody loses their minds. So why are the mainstream media so angry about this? Ben had an excellent piece on this up today. He's absolutely right. It's because Jerusalem is a pillar of the West. What this says is that Jerusalem is a pillar of the West. The West is made by Jerusalem and Athens, Revelation and Greek reason, and they come together and they form the West. And what President Trump's moving the embassy there has said is the capital of Israel is Jerusalem. This is a pillar of the West. It's going to remain that way. It's not an Eastern city. It doesn't belong to various Arab groups that want to claim Jerusalem. It belongs to Israel. It belongs to the West. They can't handle this. The mainstream media despises Israel. They despise Israel because they despise the West, and they despise the West because they despise themselves. This is an essential aspect of the left. This self-hatred manifests as a hatred of their own culture, of their own institutions, of their own religious longings, and of their own God. It comes out in all of those ways. The second reason that the mainstream media are so angry about this is because of nationalism, because this is a manifestation of true nationalism. What Donald Trump is saying is that Jerusalem is part of Israel, and therefore it is not part of the country of Palestine. The country of Palestine, by the way, we talked about this on The Conversation yesterday. The country of Palestine is to the west of Wakanda and to the east of Narnia, if you're trying to locate it on a map anywhere. But what they're saying is that the Jerusalem, this city, is in this country. It's not in another country. Deal with it. Countries have borders. The Westphalian system of nation states still exists. It still defines the world order, and we're going to keep it that way. This is a huge affront to the mainstream media's project of erasing national boundaries, of blurring national distinctions, and having just, peace and love and hippy-dippy, man. This is an affront to that because we're saying, no, the nation state still exists, still has capitals. There was a Washington Post op-ed about this by Kathleen Parker. This is how Kathleen Parker reported this. Quote, Monday started the week with a jolt in Jerusalem, where the United States and Israel celebrated the U.S. embassy move from Tel Aviv. Television spectators around the world watched as the two nations' officials gathered inside a large white tent, a metaphorical bubble that seemed to protect them from the tragedy unfolding 50 miles away in Gaza. There, Israeli soldiers opened fire on Palestinian protesters. Those quotes are from me, not from her. Protesters, killing at least 6 and wounding thousands more. Vox got even better with this. Vox said, Israelis are celebrating the U.S. embassy move. Palestinians are dying, Vox went on. Just 60 miles away, in the starkest contrast imaginable, Israeli soldiers were firing on Palestinian protesters at the Gaza border to protest the embassy move. Demonstrations that were part of a protest wave. You notice how they keep using that word? Protest wave ongoing since March. Most of the protesters were unarmed, though some threw rocks and Molotov cocktails. But no, it's okay, we won't talk about that. The Israeli military reported at least one attempt to detonate a bomb at the border during a demonstration. By the way, this is what they keep using. They keep saying, is the Israeli military reported. Granted, they reported the truth. We know they reported the truth. But they say, okay, yeah, some of the protesters were throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails, but the rest were really peaceful. But hold on, what about the ones that were throwing bombs over Molotov cocktails? Surely that's not firing on peaceful protesters. There were 40,000 Palestinian Arabs marching, throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails. Out of all of the 40,000 marching, 50 Arabs so far have been killed. We've seen huge videos of people throwing Molotov cocktails, trying to detonate bombs, burning things to the ground. So not good. We don't want to see bloodshed in that area, especially to protest something so reasonable as moving an embassy to the capital of a country. But 50 out of 40,000 could have been a lot worse. Patrick Gailey from AFP News posted this tweet. There's a tweet it was two pictures. It said left Jerusalem, right Gaza. And they were all smiling in Jerusalem, and then there was all this bloodshed in Gaza. Pictures taken at the same time this afternoon. Vox went on and said the contrast between the events is jarring. And it is jarring. It is jarring. But maybe not for the reason that Vox thinks. It's jarring because you're seeing two cultures. Two different cultures. Mitt Romney talked about this in 2012, the difference between the Palestinian Arab culture and the Israeli Jewish culture. And he got pilloried for this because they said it was Islamophobic or whatever made-up word they decided to use against Mitt Romney. These are jarring pictures because they're different cultures, and you see what sort of societies these two different cultures produce. A peaceful United States ally, working democracy in Israel, and people throwing Molotov cocktails and trying to detonate bombs and burning tires in the Arab territories in the Gaza Strip. Listen to how CNN reports this. This is the headline, quote, "Dozens of Palestinians killed in Gaza. Clashes as U.S. embassy opens." Now, okay, dozens of Palestinians killed. That's not good. But it doesn't say how were they killed just randomly. Some Israelis were walking down the street and said, we want to kill some Palestinian Arabs today. No, they were killed, but they were killed because the Israelis were acting in self-defense. Watch how the media twists this in an absurdly Orwellian way. The article opens up, it says, quote, "Palestinian officials accused Israel of committing a horrific massacre and called on the international community to immediately intervene." So that's how it opens. The first part is, Palestinians say it's a horrific massacre. Look how awful this is, right? Only later in the article does it say, the military said the protesters threw Molotov cocktails, burned tires, and stones at Israeli soldiers positioned along the fence. Now, okay, it says the military said this. We know that the protesters threw the Molotov cocktails and burned tires. How do we know? CNN has video of it on the same page as this article is written. Here's the clip. We see it very clearly. We see all the tires burning, people hurling these things over. But CNN can't admit the reality. So CNN, even though it's right there, it's saying, don't believe your lying eyes. That's just the military said. No, you said. Well, you didn't say. You just showed it with the video. By the way, none of this coverage is helping Palestinian Arabs. None of this fanning the flames. These violent protests, they've been going on for 2 months now. And the mainstream media, they're fanning the flames. They say, you deserve a country. You should have a... Granted, these are people who are not living in a legitimate nation state, people who in their own elections, their last election, elected Hamas, a terrorist organization, to govern them. They're fanning the flames and saying Jerusalem is not the capital of Israel. We know that Jerusalem was the capital of Israel. Now, contrasting this, also in Jerusalem, today marks the opening of the Guatemalan embassy there. They too, Guatemala has moved the embassy 2 days after the United States. Pretty interesting because Guatemala is also the second country to recognize Israel in 1948. And the lesson we can take here is that other countries are following American moral leadership. There were a lot of embassies in Jerusalem before 1980. In 1980, the UN Security Council denounced Israel, and they called on countries to move their embassies to Tel Aviv. But the US today still possesses moral leadership. We don't need to tiptoe around terrorists. People will follow us if we lead. In 2006, the Palestinian people, that imaginary country, elected Hamas. We do not need to pretend that there is equal moral footing here. We don't need to pretend that there's equal moral footing between the leaders of Hamas and between the duly elected prime minister of a country, a successful functioning democracy in the Middle East. The leaders of Hamas and Bibi Netanyahu. Not true. The United States can lead, people can follow, or they can fall in line. We don't need multinational, open borders, world federations to accomplish these things. In fact, very often those institutions hamper progress and hamper security. It is amazing, even today, where nationalism is a bad word, it's amazing how well the nation state still works. That product of the Westphalian system, of the world order, it still works very, very well. On that point, let's bring on our guest. Dr. Yoram Hazony is an Israeli philosopher, Bible scholar, and political theorist, president of the Herzl Institute in Jerusalem, and the author of the forthcoming book, The Virtue of Nationalism. Dr. Hazony, thank you so much for being here.
Great to have you.
So, Dr. Hazony, you're a bona fide Jerusalem resident. What is the significance, just from your own perspective, for Israeli citizens of having the United States recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel?
It's huge. It's historical. It's a massive thing. I mean, the United States, as you were saying, the United States still possesses immense moral leadership, but more important than that, maybe even is it possesses immense power. And Israel's still a small country. Thank God it's growing. It's probably in a better position now than it's been at any point since its founding. But when the entire world, when all of Europe and all of Asia and America is beating on you and saying you're an occupier in your own capital, look, that's an extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult. People in Israel are grateful. My wife and I were at the reception for the moving of the embassy on Monday night, and I can't tell you, people were crying. It was unbelievably moving to have this vote of confidence and of faith from the greatest power on earth. It's incredibly important to us.
And it's amazing how long it took. It's amazing how murky politicians have been able to make this clear moral issue. There's a reason that all of these presidential candidates over time have promised, we're going to move the embassy to Jerusalem. Jerusalem's the capital of Israel. And then they don't do it. They say, oh, well, it's complicated. I don't know. And this guy comes in and he says, no, this is the capital. The nation state is a legitimate construct. And this brings us to a second point. You've written extensively recently and excellent articles. I'm a huge fan of your writing. Criticizing what we could call the New World Order, the open borders, the European Union, the World Federation type liberalism. And you've been defending what I'll call the old New World Order, which is to say nationalism, the Westphalian system. In a word, in a phrase, what is so great about nationalism? Nationalism
is, as you know, a biblical vision, the idea that peoples should be free. What does it mean for a people to be free? It means, today we use words like sovereignty, we've got all these technical terms, but in Hebrew scripture, the vision of the prophets is that Israel and other nations will have borders, they'll govern themselves, and they'll be independent of the Egyptian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, the Assyrian Empire. All these empires had a clear vision for how to bring peace to the world by conquering it. And Scripture, the philosophy of the Hebrew Bible, is in fact this idea that justice depends on peoples being able to be free.
That's such an important point, because we hear now, we think of the nation state as this modern construct, because the world order is being totally divided into apparent nation states. That comes relatively in the modern era. But the idea of the nation is certainly not a modern concept.
No, you're right. It comes relatively in the modern. I mean, there are harbingers in medieval Catholicism, but the big push is definitely with Protestantism. Protestantism reads Hebrew scripture in some respects with new eyes and says this is a roadmap to how to bring justice to our world.
Right, that's exactly right, and that point is frequently lost. Another point that is frequently lost, and it's why I really like your writing. I've recently been buffing up again on my Edmund Burke and Michael Oakeshott and some of those conservative writers.
I saw that you tweeted out Michael Oakeshott.
I did. I think you're the only person probably who appreciated that.
there just aren't that many of us.
But this is a real problem, because we frequently hear, even on the right, that conservatives, they're actually classical liberals. Those are the same thing. Bill Kristol said this recently, as I think you noted. He said conservatives should rebrand as liberals. We're the real liberals. But you point out that there is a difference. What is the difference between conservative thought and classical liberalism?
Well, I just want to add on the point you're making. At some point in the last generation, you start to we've reached this point where you talk to somebody who's a conservative and you say, well, can you tell me what you stand for? And it takes them about 7 seconds before they start telling you how liberal they are. And no, seriously. So I believe in freedom. I believe in freedom of speech, and I believe in limited government, and I believe in free markets, and then maybe freedom of immigration. And I'm like, okay, well, I believe in those things. Those are good things. But what makes you conservative?
Right.
It's like, oh, no. Conservatism is liberalism. This is like a monstrous confusion. I don't want to just play semantical games, because playing words with labels, but there really are two extremely different historical worldviews that clashed over many centuries. And what's happened is that in the conservative movement today, there's kind of like this. You're just not supposed to talk about, I don't know if they're talking about paleo or this or that or Russell Kirk. It's just not
Right.
that long ago. We're talking about, I was in college in the 1980s. Ronald Reagan was president, and Margaret Thatcher was prime minister in the UK. And we had, like a conservative movement. We founded a conservative magazine. Irving Kristol had this organization that inducted us into the conservative movement. And we knew what we stood for. Of course, we were for free market.